Hi, everyone. Welcome to Writing Stories with my very good friend Kimberly D. Tate and myself, L.M. Spilsbury. This week we're going to talk about showing and not telling. This is a really important characteristic of writing, I think, that makes it really gripping as opposed to potentially really boring. And Kim's going to open because she has a story about when she first learned how to show and not tell.
Yeah, it was way back when you and I first met in Jillian Dagg's writing course that we took together,
Right.
and that was the very first day I met you. And I walked in like I was so young. We were both so young back then. Like this is going back in like the 80s, I would think. Yeah, the 80s.
Yeah, I know. And I don't know about you, but I was so excited to be there.
Oh, I was,
Just so excited.
Well, I was kind of excited because, I thought I was all that in a bag of chips as far as writing was concerned. you know, because so far anything I'd written, my family were they were like my best supporters, and they were always encouraging my creativity, and so I walked in there thinking I was just gonna blow the doors off everybody. And I remember that Jill had brought some items, just some random items that she put on a table in front of us. And we were supposed to write just a little short something about and use some of these items. And of course, I was really interested in Dick Francis thrillers at the time with horses and murder and mayhem, so my writing tended to lean more towards the thriller side. So I remember, I don't remember the exact thing that I wrote, but I know it was something to do with, an investigation and a cop. And so I had taken some of these items, and one was a murder weapon. I had turned it into a murder weapon, and then we all had to read our stuff out loud. So I don't know about you, but I was really excited because, like I say, I thought I was just the bee's knees when it came to writing. So I'm sitting there and I'm reading out my story, and I'm thinking it's like really good. And then, I got taken down a few pegs that day.
Oh, no.
Because
I don't remember it all, but anyways.
I was telling everything, and for the average reader, they probably wouldn't even notice. But anybody who's tried to learn the craft of writing is going to pick up on this, and there's a real difference of immediacy, like the sense of being immersed in the scene. When you're showing and not telling, it just makes for a much more immersive experience for the reader. And it is a skill that you can master, and it only takes one person to point it out to you, and it's like a light bulb moment. And so Jill, what she did was she took what I had written and rewrote it so that I could see and hear and experience what she meant as far as showing and not telling. So she was the one who really opened the doors of my writing craft, because it was that day that I learned how to show and not tell. So it was a little bit of an eye-opener, but once I figured out how to show and not tell, then nothing will ever be the same again. It's kind of like when we were learning how to ride, and we were riding along, and we were, do, in our own little world, and then someone comes along and teaches you the half halt. And once you master the half halt when you're riding, it just opens up a whole world of possibilities for you. So it's very important for any writer to learn how to show and not tell. So that was my funny story of how I learned how to show and not tell.
It's too bad that you don't still have that passage so
I
that
know.
you could read the original and read the rewritten version of it.
Well, it's
I know
funny
that.
Sorry, it's funny that you mentioned it, because I did have a book that I was working on at the time, and I gave it to Jill, and now, like, I'm so ashamed of how bad it was. I actually ended up burning it in our
Oh
burn.
no!
It
Oh
was so
no!
bad. I didn't
Oh
want
no!
anybody. I didn't want to be associated with this story. I mean, it wasn't that I didn't have much written, which was good, but it was just so bad. And when I pulled it out of the drawer, and there was all this red pen all over it, like someone was very angry. And I couldn't remember who I'd given it to, who had edited it with all this red pen. And then I remembered, oh, I think it was Jill that I gave it to, and it was so bad. But we all have to go
Boy,
through.
you have.
You know.
Well, it's true. I think any of us who are still standing and writing have been through hell to get here. And it's
Yeah,
been a
yeah.
very humbling experience, hasn't
You
it?
do. You have to check your ego at the door, because there's no
Yeah.
place for it in writing. That's for sure.
Yes, I know. You have much more vivid memories of that than I do, because I don't remember that at all. I remember meeting you. I remember just loving to go every week and being with other writers. It was just so thrilling. But I don't really remember anything else about it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And yet, I think that both of us really value the importance of a story that is shown and not just told. And it's one reason why I find your manuscript so gripping to read, because I know that you're always complaining that plotting isn't easy for you, which it isn't for me either.
Yeah.
But being able to grab the reader and bring them into the moment, I think is still the most important thing. And we were talking about it just before we started recording today. And you suggested that I should read something to show what we mean by telling, or sorry, I don't even know how to tell anymore, I'm sorry.
Yeah,
But showing but not telling. And I can read a paragraph that I wrote just this morning. And to set the scene, two of my characters were in a small personal, it's called an octocopter, which is kind of a futuristic drone helicopter, and it's been shot out of the sky and it's fallen into Lake Ontario. And so I wrote a couple of paragraphs of how they managed to get out of that. So if you want, I'll read that. It is, Mitch must have managed to push the door open. The domed curve against her spine transitioned to a flat angled surface that had to be the gull wing arching upward. They bumped and struggled along its length, then it ran out and there was just water and darkness, Mitch's hand gripping her arm and both her hands hooked like claws into his jacket. Now it was time to kick. Her lungs screamed for air. Just another second, just one more. They were rising, chasing the bubbles that foamed around them from the sinking craft. Just one more second. Light appeared above them, skating across a churning, heaving plain. Was that the light she'd read about that enveloped you when you died? Had she died and not noticed? The bubbles spread across the interface. Then she and Mitch broke through the froth. The press of water against her face disappeared. So that was my paragraph about struggling through the water to get to the surface. And, my first version of it was, almost, they went in and they had to swim to the surface and then they got there,
Yeah.
So it's a matter of, for me, of incorporating as many of the senses as possible, and then also imagery and active verbs. I find that active verbs make a big difference.
What are your characters experiencing? That's
Exactly,
the main
yeah.
thing.
Yeah.
Don't tell us what they're experiencing. Show us what they're experiencing. Like, immerse yourself into the character and what would they be going through at the time.
That's right. I recently read, or maybe it was you that had pointed out to me something online where an editor was saying some of the things that tell them right away not to bother continue reading something. And one of them is, he or she felt.
Yeah, yes.
They felt something, and that's already distancing you from the action.
Or he knew. Like, you don't ever want to say he knew da 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 da. No, he might know, but we don't know. So
exactly, yeah.
I
yeah.
have
Did you have?
I have a
Yeah.
little passage here too. I have to put my glasses on because my eyes are so bad. I need contact lenses and glasses.
Oh dear.
Close. And this is from A History of Lightning, and my character Teo has just been hit by lightning, so he's basically unconscious. And so this is my little passage. It's not very long. For a long time there was only pain. He ceased to exist as an earthly being, dwelling somewhere between unconsciousness and agony. He was on fire, burning, consumed by the flames, like one of the pictures Dax had thrown on the bonfire behind the barn that day, long ago. Only this time it was his flesh peeling back, his body dying in the fire, another Rothschild condemned to hell. Ooh. So, dum dum dum.
Yeah, that's right, eh? I know. And that's a very critical part of the story, too.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. I know. We were talking before we started recording today how we wanted to appeal to readers as much as to writers. Being writers, we tend to like to pontificate about aspects of the craft of writing, but also we would like readers to find us and get something from what we have to say in our chats. And maybe this will help some readers to understand why you might like some kind of writing better than other kinds of writing. I know very early on, when I had first started writing, and this would have been back around the time we met, I had read some short stories that had been published by just a group of people, and I thought they were wonderful. But when I read them again years later, and I realized that a lot of them were just told without showing, my appreciation for them, sadly, wasn't the same anymore.
Yeah.
And sometimes I think it's a curse to have been a reader for so many years. Both of us have been reading for 50 or 60 years.
Yeah.
And reading a lot, reading all kinds of things. And it gets to the point where we've just about read everything, and what we're reading now is just redos of something that was written before. So finding something original is a real triumph, but also something that's original and written really well. Because without the two, I find I don't appreciate a piece of work.
Yeah, and you have to remember, too, as a writer, like, showing your story is going to add to your word count, because, it's going to expand your scenes, which is good for people who write short, but for people who are long-winded like me, it can be a curse as well. But it's interesting, when you were talking about being readers for so long, and you and I have been reading for, 50 and 60 years. And I've actually started to go back and look at books that were written back in the 50s and sometimes even earlier. And I'm actually looking at books that were written for children. And you can't imagine how complex and how deeply written and like the morals, the morals that they've included in these books. I mean, these are books for children, and these are the books that you and I read. So I don't know if it's from the internet, like people's attention spans have gotten so much shorter. Like if you don't hook somebody in 3 seconds, you've lost them. But it's very interesting to see the books that I read as a child compared to the books that children are reading now. And it's almost like, they're not even really being challenged, which is kind of sad, really. And I think that, like, when you said it was a curse for us, I think that might be why, because the books that we grew up with are more adult books, but they were geared towards children. Like, I'm reading this one book called Johnny Tremaine, and it's actually funny because the word slut appears and this is a book for children. It's about the Revolutionary War, and the Boston Tea Party. And I was shocked when I was like, maybe that word didn't mean the same thing back then. But it was pretty funny when I came across that, and I was like, oh dear, this is a book for children. It was pretty funny.
No, I know. My experience with going back and reading stories from back then were reading my Andre Norton favorite books from back then. And I loved the language at the time. It came across as somewhat archaic and mysterious, and it was wonderful. But upon rereading it, oh dear, there's a lot of telling, and there's not necessarily a lot of moving the story forward.
Yeah.
But so I guess even as readers, we have changed so much compared to who we were and who people were back then. I think we're a lot more sophisticated.
Yeah.
And you're right. I think people today do have a shorter attention span, and we need to be captured and gripped, and the story needs to move quickly. Anyways, I see we're heading into 16 minutes, which is a little bit longer than what we usually do. So I guess maybe on that note, we'll say goodbye for now and check in with us next time. Bye, everyone.
Bye now.